friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. This month, July, is Jane Austen July. And I didn't really know about Jane Austen July until July was well underway. I had already decided that I'm going to be doing Austen August, so if any of you are interested in reading anything Jane Austen related, feel free to join me for #AustenAugust. But since it is Jane Austen July, and since I am starting to think about what I want to be reading next month that has anything to do with Austen, I thought I would do a shelf spotlight on some of my Jane Austen books. I have a whole shelf in my living room that is dedicated to Jane Austen herself, historical fiction and the like, and also retellings and reimaginings of some of her books, or just books that are inspired by some of her books. Today, however, I have 8 books that are focused mostly on Jane Austen's life herself. So these are going to have nods and aspects of them that are related to her 6 novels that she published, but for the most part, they are focused on her life. So let me just jump right in and tell you about the 8 books that I have focused on Jane Austen. The first one is just a historical fiction based on her life. It's called Just Jane by Nancy Moser, who has written a couple other historical fiction books based on literary figures. This is a Christian fiction, so there is an element of faith to it, focusing on the fact that Jane Austen's father was clergy and her search for finding importance and worth as a single woman in a day and age when being single as a woman was not what was expected of you. This is probably the most straight retelling of her life based on some historical facts that we have. In the back of the book, there are some thoughts from the author in particular about what is fact and fiction in Just Jane. So she did do a lot of research about her life, and this is just a historical fiction on the life of Jane Austen. But then I have a lot of stranger ones than that. The next one I have is called The Jane Austen Project by Kathleen A. Flynn. This is a relatively newer book. This one did just come out in 2017. This one has a time travel aspect. We have 2 people from present day who travel back to 1815 in order to rescue a lost novel of Jane Austen's based on some of her writings that are around. They think that there was another novel that just never got published. And so their job is to travel back to 1815, fit themselves into society, connect with Jane, befriend her, and somehow rescue her lost work without changing history. So these 2, there's a male and female, and of course I'm sure there's some romance that transpires between them. But in particular, something that I'm interested in is that the female, what's her name? Rachel, finds it very difficult to live in a time where women are so suppressed and have such different expectations on them as opposed to the freedom and independence that she knows in her present day. To go back to 1815 and be so dependent on the men in her life is very, very difficult for her. But then befriending Jane and knowing that there's an illness that takes Jane's life and wanting to try to save her, but also not wanting to change history. So it just sounds super interesting. This may make it onto my TBR for August. I'm not sure yet. We have a couple that are focused on these lost works or lost memoirs of Jane Austen, or a mysterious journal type of thing. So we have The Lost Memoirs of Jane Austen by Siri James. This is just what it is, the untold story of Jane Austen's life, a love affair that she had and recorded in this memoir that doesn't get discovered until much, 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 much later. This lost memoir is supposedly the potential inspiration for what sparked all of her works. So it's just kind of a reimagining. This memoir does not exist, but it's just if Jane had a lost memoir that had this mysterious love affair in it, maybe it would explain some of her inspiration for some of her works. Sounds like a lot of fun. This one is one that I hauled relatively recently, The Man Who Loved Jane Austen by Sally Smith O'Rourke. And in this one, there is a 200-year-old love letter that is found signed by F. Darcy. And it is written to Jane herself. So the whole premise is, what if Fitzwilliam Darcy was not a fictional character? What if he was a real person in Jane Austen's life. So the person or people involved in finding this 200-year-old letter, and supposedly they also find one that was unopened from Jane back to him, and scientists and whatnot discover that it's true. It really is from Jane Austen. She travels to this home somehow in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia and finds some of Darcy's long lost relatives. I don't know, it sounds like a lot of fun. The cover is not appealing to me in the least. It's not hideous, I suppose. It just, first of all, I hate the stickers, but I need to get some Goo Gone to work on those. But it's not something that would normally appeal to me, but I'm definitely a fan of reading a book about a real Mr. Darcy. So that sounds like fun. Here's another one with a mysterious journal that is found by a Jane Austen professor. So this professor of Austen literature finds this mysterious journal. This one has a little bit of magical realism because this journal has almost a life of its own, and this professor, Kate, thinks that it's Jane Austen herself writing to her in the journal, so they kind of can communicate back and forth through the words in this journal. So Kate has her own love affair and brooding co-worker and mysterious man from these events that she attends. Yeah, so it has a lot of nods to Jane Austen and Jane Austen literature, but not anything particularly related to Jane Austen's life itself, other than this aspect of this lost journal where Jane is communicating with her. That one doesn't quite fit as much as I thought it did at first, but you know, it is what it is. I do have one nonfiction in this pile. This is called A Walk with Jane Austen, A Journey into Adventure, Love, and Faith by Laurie Smith. Laurie is in her mid-30s and just kind of struggling with the way that her life has turned out. She, I believe, goes to Oxford to take a class, in a literature class about Jane Austen's life, and absolutely falls in love, and then proceeds to travel to some places in England that are important in Jane's life, like Bath and Lyme and London and the Hampshire countryside, and has profound thoughts about life and kind of changes the way she thinks about things, and it explores grace and hope and getting joy and beauty, finding joy and beauty out of kind of what is an ordinary life. I think it just sounds really lovely to explore the places that were important to Jane, and also some of these themes that are important for all of us. I just think that this sounds like an interesting nonfiction to read and would be good to read alongside of some other Jane Austen type books. The final two I have are a little bit YA, I guess you could say. This one is also written by Siri James. She wrote, let's see, this Lost Memoirs of Jane Austen. She also wrote Jane Austen's First Love. And this is about a 15-year-old Jane who goes to visit her brother in Kent and falls madly in love with Edward Taylor, a fascinating young man who is truly worthy of her affections. However, things aren't quite as they seem. That love affair does not take off. Jane also plays matchmaker to some of the people that she meets while there with her brother. Those also don't turn out right. So there are some nods, I guess, to like Emma, and she learns that first impressions aren't what they're cracked up to be. Pride and Prejudice. There's some nods to some of Jane's works in this story as well, but it's just a reimagining of her life as a young woman. And finally, another one that's definitely YA is I Was Jane Austen's Best Friend by Cora Harrison. This is a YA. It's written mainly in diary format about this young woman named Jenny Cooper, who is apparently an orphaned cousin of Jane's who comes to visit her, and her life is never the same after that. She's rather shy and just talks about her experiences going to balls and dinner parties and living life with the Austen family, in particular her cousin Jane. Yeah, just sounds like a quick read. In this one, there are some, because it's written in diary format from the perspective of a young teenage girl, we have some illustrations, some copies of letters or calling cards. This one should be a rather quick read, but that is the last of them. So here are the 8 books that I have that are focused more on Jane Austen's life than on particularly retellings of her works. I'm hoping to get to 1, maybe 2 of these during my Austen August. I would love for you to join in if you haven't. Well, even if you did do Jane Austen July, but you want to read some Austen inspired or Austen works on their own in the month of August, I would love for you to join me. Let's chat in the comments below about any of these books or any thoughts that you have about Jane Austen or any other ideas that you might have for me for shelf spotlights in the future. In August, I will be doing a little bit more about Jane Austen. I have a whole stack of Pride and Prejudice retellings, so I'll be talking about some of those. In my TBR, you'll see some retellings of some other books that I also have, some of her other works. But yeah, let's chat in the comments. You know I love talking to you down there. Give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will definitely be talking to you in another video very soon. Bye!